From Mythri Foundation, we thought that when a person is maintaining peace within himself, he will be able to spread peace around. Therefore, we took this program, addictions, because that is the most haunting subject which is destroying the youth. I remember in the film Godfather, in the story of Godfather, when the others wanted to bring drugs, Godfather says, it destroys our youth, we don't want it. So, according to our studies, 16 crore people are addicted to various types of substance abuse, and 6 crores of them need help, therapeutic help. And particularly, more than 5 lakh children and neo-adolescents are involved in this. Therefore, we thought giving them therapeutic guidance in this matter will be extremely useful. That is why we are having Dr. David Lincoln, Dr. Dhananjay, and Smita speaking about 3 different types of therapeutic help available to these people. Back to Jyotsna.
Thank you. For those of us who saw our flyer today, we would have noticed that we have another association who is co-hosting the program with us, and that's a Discussion Class Association. I request Nagesh to again speak about Discussion Class Association.
Discussion Class Association is a very unique institution. There is one person in Bhadravati. He was working in Life Insurance Corporation of India. But before that, he was helped for his studies by his teacher. Therefore, after graduating and after getting a job, he initiated what is known as DCs, discussion centers. In these discussion centers, there are no teachers and there is no tuition fees, yet students who come there learn in a very great manner. And in the CET, many of them have scored below top 50 ranks. What happens there is the students who have passed out earlier from the same center will come and guide the younger students. And the current students, whoever is familiar with one particular aspect among their studies, that they will present. So a kind of discussion takes place, no classroom technique. So a discussion takes place. And through discussion, everybody will be learning. And he was due to retire, and after retirement, he wanted to involve me also and spread it outside Bhadravati. Unfortunately, 2 days before retirement, he met with a car accident and husband and wife both died. So students of Dr. Gopal Krishnamurthy, Dhananjay Padmanabhachar and others, they have been funding the education of poor students. They have been conducting classes in certain remote parts of the state also. And they are continuing the task initiated by Gopal Krishnamurthy in tune with whatever dreams he had. So Discussion Class Association is a wonderful platform for the people to help each other, students to gain confidence. And I personally know a few friends who have come from poverty, but today are in very good positions. So DC Class Association is one of the most noble-hearted organization. They have a Facebook page. You can visit them.
That's a very nice working example of individual social responsibility in action. Thank you for sharing that with us. Now we move on to hear from our chief expert today, Dr. David Lincoln. And he's going to introduce us to neurolinguistic programming and how that can be used in handling addictions. I have my daughter here and she's distracting me. So sorry about that. Okay, so Dr. David is a master trainer of NLP and hypnosis, and he's a current president of ANLP India, the premier organization in India which represents NLP. He trained in NLP both in UK and in California, and is currently an international master trainer of NLP. So he also continued his studies in psychology, and his PhD thesis was on body-mind connection, and he also studied on naturopathy, and he's an accomplished martial arts expert with judo as his main subject. So if any of you want to take any panga with him, please be careful. He's very capable of protecting himself. Over to you, Dr. David. Looking forward to learning a lot more on NLP from you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to this quick and short introduction. Neuro-linguistic programming, which we'll now call NLP, unfortunately, those letters have been hijacked by other organizations like Natural Language Processing and the Northern League Premiership and Non-Living Person and various others. But NLP, the basic bit which we're important about in this particular subject is the language and understanding the language at a deeper level enables you to understand the person at a deeper level. And when we say language, we're not only talking about the language that I talk to you and you talk to me, but also the language in which we talk to ourselves. And this language is very important. So just a little bit about the mechanics, if you like, of addiction so that we understand where we're coming from. Basically, humans, us human beings, are the most addictive of all the animal species. And to a certain extent, it's important to be addicted because if we were not addicted to water and oxygen and food, we wouldn't live very long. Now, addiction basically is a habit that's got out of control. There are chemical addictions and there are psychological addictions. Chemical addictions obviously are taken up by the body and they're much harder to get rid of, and we'll talk about that in a little while. And you know, in psychology, we actually have something called an addictive personality type. And this is the type of person that's more likely to get addicted. Now, as I said earlier on, addiction stems from habit. Habit is its basic principle. Now, what happens to the human brain is time. If you think about it, if you knew everything and everything was available to you, well, it would be pretty difficult. Some of you may have seen the film Lucy, that sort of entertainment-wise shows somebody that has everything available to them. So what happens is that we only have some of the information available to us at any given time. So to make this easy for us, we develop habits, we develop strategies, and we develop all sorts of methods that we can automatically do things without thinking about it. So what happens with addiction, it hijacks this mechanism that you have in your head to help you do things automatically. That's the simple way of putting it. Now, if we look at a habit, just a quick breakdown of exactly how a habit works, and you've all got hundreds of thousands of habits you do all the time. So for a habit to run, if we can put it in this way, it needs a cue or a trigger. Something has to say, right, you've got to do something. Let's pick something very simple, getting out of bed in the morning as a habit. Right? You obviously all got out of bed this morning, otherwise you wouldn't be here. So something triggers you, cues you, oh, time to get up. Maybe an alarm clock, maybe an internal alarm clock, maybe just, oh, I've got to get on with my day. And after you've got that cue or trigger, what follows is what's technically known as a craving. I want to do it now. I've triggered into doing it. Now I want to do it, the craving. And that craving leads to a response, you actually doing it. And that response leads to a reward, often a reward in the brain of dopamine or some other neurotransmitters that make you feel good. Now, as we said earlier, not all addictions are bad. So you could say that there are good addictions and there are bad addictions. So obviously, I've already mentioned some of the good addictions is the oxygen, the water and the food, but then meditation. relaxation, exercise, walking, talking, and all the other things that you can do addictively are, in some respects, good addictions. And then there are bad addictions. And these bad addictions, of course, alcohol, cigarettes, street drugs of all the various forms, pharmaceuticals, big problem in America with pharmaceuticals, prescribed drugs for painkillers, opioids, where, you know, a huge number of people in America are totally addicted to them. Then, of course, there's more abstract things like the internet. When I was a kid, of course, it was the television. We were all addicted to the television. And that television addiction was quite often created by the parents, because the television used to be the unpaid babysitter. Oh, go and watch the television while Daddy and I talk about some important things. And so we were quite delighted to go and watch the television. Of course, in those early days, and I'm going back a long time ago. In fact, I think we had one of the first televisions in our street. That was in about 1952, something like that. In those early days, there wasn't a hell of a lot of programs, and a lot of it was educational, and it certainly didn't have all the sex and violence that we have nowadays. So the reality of this is that you can be addicted to anything. Anything at all. People can be addicted to colors, people can be addicted to people, places. You know, there are people that don't even move out of their village. They're almost totally addicted to the village that they live in. So these would be some good and bad addictions. Now, as we now understand how addictions are formed, I suppose the next thing we need to do is to look at what we can do about them. Now, first and foremost, and you know, one of the earlier pioneers of addictions was, of course, Alcoholics Anonymous, which was a Christian-based group that spread across the world. And they have a 12-step program. And the first of those 12 steps is actually for every addiction. And that is admitting that you have an addiction. Unless you, as the, shall we call you patient or client, whatever words you want to use, so your patient or client, unless they admit they have an addiction, it's going to be very hard, other than physical force, to stop that addiction. So number one is admitting that you have this addiction. Now, sometimes your friends have to help you to understand that you've got that. Sometimes you'll have to start with recording things or making notes how often you do something. The second thing, of course, is be willing to ask for and accept help. Because if you don't accept or want help, you know, I've seen this with cigarette smokers. When I run my programs, I normally have 20, 30 people in the room at a time, and there'll always be one or two smokers. And I go up to the smoker and say, would you like to stop smoking? And sometimes they say, yes. And then I look them in the eyes very carefully and say, do you really want to stop smoking? Do you really, really want to stop smoking? And then they go, no. And they don't, because they get a pleasure out of it. And that's something you have to remember with addictions, is that when you take away an addiction, you're going to leave a big void, a big space in that person's life. And that space has to be filled with something. Alcoholics Anonymous, for example, fill that big space with religion. You don't have to fill it with religion. But, you know, for example, coming back to smokers, when they don't smoke, they have a strange feeling, and especially when they have a habit attached to it, which is smoking after dinner, they need to do something straight away. So you need to replace that void with something else. It could be as simple as washing up or taking a walk or whatever. So that is the picture of it. Now, individual treatment plans depend an awful lot on what the client or the patient is addicted to. Now, if there is some addiction, then you definitely need to get into some detoxification. You need to get that chemical out of the system, because withdrawal symptoms are of the chemical leaving the system. I hope your internet's coming. It says my internet is unstable, so I hope you can still hear me. So stronger the withdrawal and the more you get something back. So if you're on to very heavy addictions of alcohol or street drugs or even pharmaceutical drugs, then really the only way forward is the medical. And the medical model is basically, I know it sounds silly, but it's basically drugging you for a period of time so that you don't feel the withdrawal symptoms. And then after somewhere between 5 and 15 days, it depends on the substance, that is out of your system. And then you can start the rehabilitation, the psychotherapy, or whatever other type of therapy you're interested in. So that's fairly easy when it comes to chemical stuff. Now, what is a lot harder is what I would loosely describe as the psychological addictions. Things like internet and maybe pornography or sex or any of the other things that actually excite your brain, excites the exciting neurons in your brain and gives you a great feeling. Now, these are a little bit more harder, but if you keep in mind the basic principle that you've got to replace it with something. So if somebody is 100% on internet addiction, which is the latest thing, you know, and they're on the internet 10 hours a day, or games, you know, playing games and so on, you can't just stop that because you'll have a fight on your hands, basically. You have to slowly reduce whatever and bring in something else that is less dangerous. It'll be addictive, but less dangerous. I mean, everything's addictive if you think about it. Anything that gives you pleasure is addictive, whether it be a jam tart, a nice piece of bread, or playing a game for hours on end. Now, when it comes to children and young people, and I can't put too fine a point on this, but a lot of this has been created by the parents. I'm not blaming parents, don't get me wrong, but the thing is, if you can put some, I mean, if you've got young children and start putting in the groundwork then in young children, the chances of you having addiction later will be less. But once you get to 16, 17 and they've
We seem to have lost Dr. David for a moment. Let's try to get him back. It's raining heavily in Goa, so that's causing the network disturbance.
worst of you, all right? So we look at what you did when you were best, and let's see if we can do that again and reproduce the best. So I think I better stop there, otherwise I'll dominate the whole of the session. But we do have lots of things to help you. So shall I pass you back to